Right now, we'll talk with Bill Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University. You can find him on Twitter at Dr. B. Rosenberg. That's at DRB Rosenberg. And one of the things we'll talk about is a very busy week in the political world and the resignation of Justice Kennedy. Bill, good morning.
Good morning, Kent.
Glad to have you with us. So, what's your take on the resignation of Justice Kennedy? He was the swing vote on so many votes. A couple of them on the Affordable Care Act, gay rights, and some other issues as well. Will there be a swing vote, or is this all just going to be 5-4, 5-4, 5-4 from here on in?
Well, what I think we need to recognize is that Justice Kennedy was a conservative. He did on some occasions vote as a swing vote, going with the more liberal justices. But, we have to realize that he did come to the court as a 51-year-old by Ronald Reagan. And now this balance of liberals and conservatives on the court is a little bit in flux. We're going to have to see how this plays out. There's a couple of issues that come up. First of all, John Roberts may end up becoming a sort of a swing vote on the Supreme Court. He showed that when we looked at the Affordable Care Act, where he basically rescued it from being decimated by the court a few years ago. We also have to take a look at who the replacement is going to be. And the replacement obviously is going to be a conservative. But while many people are very concerned, we're replacing a conservative with another conservative. It would be different, for example, if someone like Ginsburg was going off the court and you are replacing a liberal with a conservative. But nonetheless, it still raises a lot of questions about what the direction of the court's going to be by having a new, younger, probably much more conservative justice than Anthony Kennedy.
Yeah, I did, similar to what you were just saying, I saw some tweets over the weekend by some folks kind of toward the political left, I would say, basically saying, calm down, this isn't going to be that big a change.
Well, I think what we have to recognize is that the Supreme Court is, one of the three branches of government. It's a co-equal branch. It plays a particularly important role, particularly because it puts kind of the seal of approval on either acts by Congress or actions by the president. Many liberals have hoped that the Supreme Court would change and go perhaps 5-4 in their favor, particularly in terms of issues, for example, like gun ownership and gun rights, the Second Amendment issue. But that's certainly not going to be the case probably with whoever comes onto the court now. The Supreme Court is also often talked about as, the end of Roe versus Wade. Probably not the case. Probably what we're looking at is over time sort of a continual chipping away of more free access to abortion rights, with states coming in and putting more impediments in the way of people. But as we've seen with modern advances in science and medicine, the number of abortions has actually gone down because of greater birth control and other techniques to maintain sort of a woman's right to control her body.
Also, I would think there will probably be some more voting rights cases coming before the Supreme Court as well.
Right. Well, we just had a big one that impacted us in Pennsylvania with gerrymandering, the drawing of boundary lines for political advantage. That pace may slow down a little bit. The court has been weighing in, although weighing in less than they used to.
Yeah, they've punted on several other cases.
Yeah, the Supreme Court has taken a position that they're going to be less involved in some of these cases, but nonetheless, when they do become involved, deciding who your voters are going to be is very important to deciding who's going to win in a particular election.
Mm-hmm. Talking with Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, about a number of things going on. Do Democrats have any chance whatsoever of stopping whoever it is that the president puts up there for this, or is it a foregone conclusion that he's going to get whoever he wants?
Well, I think what we have to recognize is that politics is basically, even in Trump's world, the art of the deal. If Donald Trump puts up someone who is completely unacceptable to large swaths of the American public, he's going to get quite a bit of blowback. But the reality is that the people that are going to be nominated by Donald Trump have all been very heavily vetted by a group called the Federalist Society, very conservative organization that sort of wants to put conservative judges on the bench. So we're not likely to see any blow-ups in terms of hidden information about judges that knocks them out at the last moment. We're not going to see sort of the repeat of the Bork incidences in the 1980s. But particularly the Senate, which has to confirm the Supreme Court justices after they've been nominated by the president, is in a little bit of flux. And what we're going to see play out is the Democrats are going to try and delay and stall the process, hoping that they're able to take control of the Senate in the fall midterm elections. But even then, there's still going to be this back and forth between liberals and conservatives on who is acceptable and who is not. And probably Trump will put someone in that is going to cause less blowback than the most extreme cases. But nonetheless, this is something that the Republicans have been working for, and Mitch McConnell has been working for a long time.
Now, something else coming up soon, July 16th, President Trump meets with Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, in Finland. What do you expect him to do there? President Trump has been accused of rolling over for the Russians, and he says, well, nobody's tougher on Russia than me.
Well, it's kind of an interesting situation because we're right in the midst of a Mueller investigation looking at Russian collusion with the 2016 elections, and Donald Trump is going and meeting with Vladimir Putin. The optics really aren't so good. The optics are also further complicated because if you remember back about a year ago when Trump fired Comey, the next day he met with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador and basically said, well, now things are going to be a little bit easier for me because the heat is off of me, essentially. And here, about a year later, he's meeting with Vladimir Putin. We have to recognize, though, that even during the campaign, Trump stressed the fact that he wanted to be friends with Russia. He thought that it would be better to be friends than adversaries. So we'll see how this plays out. But we're also looking at a leader, Putin, who is a trained sort of spy operative who is very good at manipulation and may, in a sense, be playing Donald Trump when they're meeting. You know, the issue is who's going to be in the room with him, what are they going to discuss? And, you know, just coming off of the North Korean summit where it appears from, you know, all sort of verifiable sources that maybe the United States didn't get such a great deal in that summit that now we're going against a much more sophisticated adversary and Putin, and questions really come up on how the U.S. is going to fare in that game.
Are there any issues in particular that they're expected to discuss, or is it just kind of a, hey, let's sit down and talk?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues that could potentially come up. One of them may certainly be that with regards to Syria. You know, the Russians have a major interest in that country. They're supporting Assad. We are trying as best we can as a nation to not get into a military conflict. That's why we have deconfliction zones and so forth. But ultimately, you know, there's this balance of power in the Middle East that Russia wants to become more a player of. There's also the issue still lingering out there with sanctions and the issues associated with Ukraine. And furthermore, there's really the concern, particularly among the many of the countries that are in the near Russian influence, the countries right along the Russian border, that are concerned that Russia may try to do something in their countries as well, and like they did in Ukraine, and sort of this is the pressure back and forth between NATO and Russia and between the EU and Russia. I think many of our allies, particularly in Europe, are very concerned about how Trump handles sort of these border countries in the Russian sphere of influence.
Speaking of Russia, they had a big win yesterday in the World Cup soccer tournament, and are doing better than people expected. They're hosting the World Cup. Is there some politics involved here too?
Well, we have to realize that sports and politics are often heavily interwoven. Just think back, every 4 years we also have the Olympics, and this is often the competition between the United States and Russia and China in particular. Right now we're seeing the major network in the United States broadcasting World Cup. The Russians are basically showing themselves off very well. I mean, it depends upon how you want to, what perspective you want to take, but when the Great Britain took over the Olympics a couple years ago, the discussion was, look how wonderful Great Britain is and look how wonderful they're playing the whole routine of the host. Here we're in a situation where Russia is doing the same thing. There was some concern originally that there was going to be some problems in terms of racism or hooliganism that were going to take place at the World Cup in Russia, but that really hasn't played out. But Americans, I think, because they're not such big fans of soccer as other countries around the world, are not probably as impacted as other countries are and their citizens. When they look at the World Cup, they're looking at terrific matches. They're looking at a host nation which is running it very well. And as a sidelight, the United States didn't even get to the dance. We didn't even make the World Cup event. So we're in an interesting period. Russia is in some ways ascending. If we think back 20 years ago, Russia was nowhere near the presence on the world stage as they are today, and now they're involved in sort of negotiations with Syria, with conflicts with Western Europe, and now they're way up on the sports stage. Just a short while ago, they were basically kicked out of the Olympics because of drug testing. So, it's a crazy world, but that's where we're at. It
sure is. Meanwhile, the U.S. has been awarded the 2026 World Cup, but not alone, in conjunction with Mexico and Canada.
Well, it's interesting, the way international events, the World Cup, and with the Olympics, is they try to get a primary site, but then also have other sites as well. One of the things that maybe a lot of Americans might be a little bit more concerned about if they knew more about it is that the Russians, they're hosting sites in 12 different locations. They include Moscow and St. Petersburg, but they also include Sochi, which was sort of a contested area in the Ukraine area. When we look at the United States, most of the World Cup events are actually going to take place in the U.S., not in Canada and Mexico, but it's to spread the wealth and to increase sort of the viewership and participation. We saw, for example, in the events that took place in Brazil in terms of the world stage, they had multiple cities involved that you had to take aircraft to get between the games or events. So this is sort of a pattern that's occurring, that we don't just have one city or even one country involved in doing hosting anymore.
All right. Dr. Bill Rosenberg, thanks for talking with us this morning.
Well, have a great day.
Hey,
Take
you
care.
too. He's a professor of political science at Drexel University. He tweets at DRB Rosenberg.